Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who has joined us online or will later watch this video. Welcome to the concluding session of the Geneva Nature-Based Solution Dialogues, co-convened by the Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which we refer to as IUCN. These nature-based solution dialogues aimed at facilitating further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in international Geneva and beyond on the role and opportunities provided by nature-based solutions in the lead-up to major environmental negotiations. We have benefited throughout our journey of the expertise of IUCN members. Today, we are hosting the 11th dialogue, and we will be focusing on people, a few days ahead of the Human Rights Day and during the 16 days of the global campaign to end gender-based violence. This year, 2021, has been an important year for enhanced recognition of the interdependency of people, human rights, and nature. In October, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a landmark resolution formally recognizing that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is itself a human right. Some of the panelists who have joined us today were instrumental in making this happening. Today's session, as the last dialogue in the 2021 series, will conclude with reflections on the key outcomes drawn from across the Geneva Nature-Based Solutions dialogues. Veronica Ruiz from IUCN, who was instrumental for setting up these dialogues, will bring those conclusions to you at the end of today's event. One of the key messages is about the need of inclusivity, and indeed, though English is the main language of International Geneva for informal meetings, it is important we look at finding solutions for interpretation when we host such events. The platform we are using recently integrated channels for interpretation, but we have to apologize because it has not yet been activated on our server. Before we go into depth on the topic we are addressing today, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the dialogue will be made available on the webpage of this event. We will share the link in the chat. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We will use your questions to feed the discussion after the presentations. To co-welcome you to this event, set the stage of the Nature-Based Solutions for People, and moderate the session, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Jenny Springer, who is the Director of IUCN Global Governance and Rights Program. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Diana. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panel of speakers and to all of you joining the audience online. My name is Jenny Springer. As Diana said, I direct the Global Program on Governance and Rights of IUCN, and we lead IUCN's efforts on rights-based approaches to conservation, gender equality and women's empowerment, Indigenous peoples and conservation, and inclusive natural resource governance. I'm very pleased to moderate this session, the 2021 Geneva Nature-Based Solutions Dialogue Series on the topic of nature-based solutions and people. This is the week the international community celebrates Human Rights Day, November 9th, and today is also part of the 16 days between the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Human Rights Day, when the global community campaigns to end its violence. So it's a very timely moment to be turning our attention to the relationship between people, nature, and human rights. Our session today will have a few different segments, starting with opening remarks, then a brief presentation to set the stage, then interventions from each of our panelists, followed by questions and closing remarks. And again, I remind you that for the Q&A segment, you can post questions in the Q&A chat box. Okay, I'd like to begin by inviting Razan Al-Mubarak to give opening remarks. For more than 20 years, Razan has played a vital role in guiding her country towards a more sustainable future. This experience leading the Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi, the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund, and Emirates Nature WWF recognition as one of the top 100 young global leaders by the World Economic Forum in 2018. In September 2021, at the World Congress in Marseille, France, Razan was elected president of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature for a 4-year term. A warm welcome, Razan, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all you here today joining us online. As you've heard from Jenny and this previous speaker from UNEP, this dialogue is the culmination of a year-long journey and an occasion to celebrate the International Human Rights Day, a gathering opportunity to demonstrate that the moral separation from nature, instead of considering ourselves as part of nature, can only lead to the mismanagement of our natural resources. And we are witnessing today how unjust environmental conditions imposed on the poorest and the most vulnerable are not only unsustainable, but they are indeed unethical and unhealthy. The adoption of Resolution 4813 by the Human Rights Council, recognizing that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a fundamental human right, is a key step forward to bring about a major change. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights stated, bold action is now required to ensure that this resolution on the right to a healthy environment serves as a springboard to push transformative economic, social, and environmental policies that will protect people and nature. Ladies and gentlemen, the current pandemic has led to significant setbacks for social and economic development, lowering productivity, limiting incomes, and triggering increases in social inequality. As we start taking recovery actions, we need to learn from our previous mistakes and prioritize responses that do no harm to both society and to nature. We need to build better. We need to build better for all. Nature-based solutions can be a key part of this response. And by leveraging nature-based solutions as a crisis response, we can also go beyond the do no harm to deriving simultaneous, tangible benefits for human well-being and biodiversity. This could also accelerate the shift to more sustainable approaches for longer-term development and economic growth. Ambition and progress, neither of them can be reached without collaboration and partnership across diverse groups of actors, including governments, the international communities, Indigenous and women leaders, researchers, and businesses. And this is why today we're calling for action. And we must start by breaking down silos and creating synergies for the common good of both people and nature. The IUCN Global Standard on Nature-Based Solution aims to ensure that actions taken to simultaneously conserve ecosystems and address societal challenges bring about the desired benefits for people and nature. The Global Standard offers a rigorous, consistent, and accountable framework that will help avoid the misuse of this concept and take this concept from local to global scale. The Global Standard is a tool that supports the use of common language as the vehicle for creating a cross-sectoral and trustful dialogue to achieve the ambition and progress for our current society and for generations to come. The Global Standard requires that robust social safeguards must be applied to recognize, respect, and protect human rights and support livelihoods. It also emphasizes that Indigenous people and local communities, women and girls, and all of those whose rights must be upheld and advanced as part of the actions to conserve nature. For we cannot achieve environmental justice if we do not strive for social and economic justice, underpinned by the universal goal of attaining human rights and dignity for all, which was a key outcome of the Marseille Manifesto. Ladies and gentlemen, the time to act is now, and nature-based solutions and the ability to contribute to them must be equally accessible. We need all hands on deck to overcome today's environmental and social challenges for the well-being of people and nature. Thank you very much, Jenny, for this opportunity, and look forward to our discussions this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Razan, for those inspiring opening remarks. We're very glad to have you with us for this discussion today. As the next, I have a brief presentation to set the stage for our topic. And I'd like to begin by offering some reflections on the deep connections among nature, people, and human rights. We know that nature is fundamental to the well-being of all people and underpins the realization of many human rights, including, most basically, the right to life. Recognition of these links was significantly bolstered this year by a landmark decision of the Human Rights Council, which recognized that having a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is itself a human right. Next slide, please. We also know that it is people, through their diverse forms of agency, knowledge, and cultural practices, who steward and conserve nature. And securing human rights with a particular attention to people who face obstacles to their age contributes to the conservation of nature. Some examples of this are inclusive participation, contributes to more informed and robust environmental decision-making, and secure rights of Indigenous peoples to their lands and resources that enables their environment. Turning now to nature-based solutions, let's first recall what NBS are. As defined by IUCN, nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing well-being and biodiversity needs. So nature-based solutions focus on and open opportunities to benefit both people and nature. And as we've seen from the close connections among nature, people, and human rights, to realize these opportunities, nature-based solutions must take a rights-based approach. So taking a rights-based approach means, among other things, that nature-based solutions must be grounded in human rights standards and aim to protect human rights. Also, that they must give particular attention to those facing inequalities and the greatest barriers to the realization of rights and contributions. That NBS must be gender responsive and broadly inclusive. And in particular, that nature-based solutions must recognize Indigenous peoples and local communities as key actors with leadership roles in nature-based solutions. The IUCN Nature-Based Solutions Standard, which Razan introduced remarks, was developed to provide guidance on key elements of equitable and effective nature-based solutions. It includes a criterion 5, which sets the standard that is based on inclusive, transparent, and empowering governance processes. Some of the key indicators of this are that any NBS intervention must have an agreed feedback and grievance resolution mechanism. It must involve participation based on mutual respect and equality, regardless of gender, age, or social status, and uphold the right of Indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent. Stakeholders who are directly affected need to be identified and involved in all processes of the NBS intervention. Making processes must document and respond to the rights and interests of all participating and affected stakeholders. These elements of the standard provide an important foundation that we can build on in further advancing a rights-based and gender-responsive approach to NBS. In my last few slides, I'd like to focus in on two aspects of this rights-based approach where IUCN has substantial experience before turning to the panel to hear their ideas on these and other issues from their experts. The first topic I'd like to focus on is Indigenous peoples' contributions to nature-based solutions. And here it's important to recognize that Indigenous peoples are pioneers of nature-based solutions and have been implementing them for centuries, linked to their intrinsic relationships with nature. In particular, the wealth of intricate knowledge that Indigenous peoples have developed about their diverse ecosystems are a major contribution to solutions. And it's also important to emphasize that having secure rights to collective lands and resources provides a vital foundation for sustaining the contributions of Indigenous knowledge and governance to nature-based solutions. What this means for a rights-based approach to NBS is that they should recognize and promote Indigenous systems of management and use of natural and cultural resources. As part of this, it's essential to ethically engage with Indigenous knowledge holders in ways that uphold their rights. Nature-based solutions should also integrate actions to secure appropriate recognition for Indigenous lands, territories, and resources. And they should also channel direct support to locally led actions by the community ecosystems that are essential for the health. Next slide, please. The second topic concerns nature-based solutions and gender equality. And of course, we must recognize that all nature-based solutions initiate to be implemented in contexts that are shaped by gender dynamics affecting who uses and benefits from natural resource ways, who has access to decision-making, and who holds what knowledge. Here again, diverse women are playing leadership roles in nature-based solutions, and gender equitable strategies are needed to support them and enable their continued contribution. So some key aspects of a gender responsive approach to NBS include ensuring inclusion considerations throughout the development and implementation of projects, including in partner arrangements, overcoming barriers to visibility and voice, gender analysis to inform NBS planning, including to identify and mitigate factors like gender-based violence, and also to identify communities to advance equality, including specific actions that address the different needs and interests of women and men, providing support for inclusive and participatory natural resource governance, and ensuring compliance with global human rights and gender equality policies and standards. In closing, I'd like to emphasize that to advance a rights gender responsive approach to nature-based solutions, we need to be learning from one another and find ways to work together through joint actions. And this is the purpose of our panel today, to learn from the expertise and experiences of a diverse range of speakers on how to ensure that nature-based solutions engage and support the contributions of all. Thank you. So from here, I would like to move to the members of our panel. We have 5 speakers on the panel today, and I will start by introducing Mr. Ramiro Batsin. Ramiro is a Maya Cachiquel Indigenous expert from Guatemala. He has a master's degree in local environmental management and also a degree in communication science. His current positions include serving as executive director of Asociación Tzotzil. He's the coordinator of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, and he's also global advisor for Indigenous peoples in IUCN and serves on IUCN's council, and is a member of the Guatemala Council on Climate Change. His areas of expertise include natural resources, biodiversity, forests, communal lands, protected areas, traditional knowledge, risk management and climate change, and participation. Ramiro will be speaking in Spanish today, and I'll come back in a moment to the arrangements for translation. Our second panelist is Carolina de Vandas Aguilar. She's a Costa Rican lawyer and human rights advocate with 20 years of international work experience, particularly with the United Nations system. In 2014, she acted as UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities and served in that role until 2020. She's currently the permanent representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations. Our third panelist is Myrna Fernandez. Mirna studied environmental engineering and fine arts and holds a master's degree in biodiversity and tropical systems. She's co-founder of Reacción Climática, a citizen collective promoting actions on the ground to address climate change in Bolivia. She is also a steering committee member of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network and serves as its policy coordinator, as well as co-founding the Bolivian chapter of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Mrinalini Rai is a women's rights and environmental advocate and director of Women for Biodiversity. Mrinalini works on policy advocacy, research at the intersection of gender equality, women and girls' rights, and environmental justice. She also serves as the co-convener of the CBD Women and Gender Caucus, which supports women's civil society engagement in the CBD through active participation, information sharing, and into the policy space on biodiversity and environment-related processes. And our fifth panelist is Kristen Walker-Painemia. She's the chair of the IUCN Commission on Environment, Economic, and Social Policy, so known as CESP, and is Senior Vice President and Managing Director of the Center for Communities and Conservation at Conservation International. And Kristen's work has focused for many years on the social dimensions of conservation. So a warm welcome to all of you on the panel. We're very glad to have you with us here today and to learn from your ideas, your experience, and your recommendations. And I'd like to start by calling on each panelist one by one to give your interventions on the opportunities for advancing rights-based and gender-responsive nature-based solutions. Each speaker will have about 3 minutes, and I'd like to first request Ramiro Batzin to give his intervention focusing on the participation of Indigenous peoples and how this is crucial to ensure protection of nature and Indigenous peoples' rights. Over to you, Ramiro.
Thank you, Jenny. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Reciban de Tierras Mayas un saludo. En primer lugar, agradezco a los organizadores de este evento, a Verónica Ruiz y a Diana Rizzo, quienes han coordinado estos diálogos sobre soluciones basadas en la naturaleza de UICN todo este año, y a la Red de Medio Ambiente de Ginebra por la invitación. Así también un saludo a los y las hermanas y colegas que forman parte de esta mesa el día de hoy. Quiero iniciar expresando que en nuestro calendario maya hoy marca la energía Día del Camino, de los caminos blancos de nuestros pueblos. Hoy es el día de emprender acciones a futuro y este evento es uno de ellos. Para los pueblos indígenas, hablar de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza es hablar de la relación recíproca que tenemos con la madre naturaleza, la madre tierra, y del equilibrio que debe existir entre la madre naturaleza, el ser humano y el universo. Para los pueblos indígenas, estos están interrelacionados y por lo tanto las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza debe tener en el corazón de su diseño e implementación. Las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza deben partir reconociendo, respetando y promoviendo los aportes, conocimientos y derechos que los pueblos indígenas poseen para con sus tierras, territorios y recursos, así como sus sistemas tradicionales de uso, manejo y conservación de los recursos naturales y culturales, mismos que se interrelacionan en el Utzcaslemal, o modelo de vida indígena, para mi caso, el modelo de vida maya cachiquel. Las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza deben sumarse a fortalecer las formas propias de organización indígena, sus normas y estatutos, nuestros sistemas económicos, sociales y culturales. Hoy nuestra madre tierra afronta los impactos del cambio climático y de la pandemia del COVID-19, los cuales solo pueden ser afrontados si aplicamos soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, pero desde un enfoque basado en derechos humanos, derechos indígenas y género, particularmente la participación de la mujer y la juventud, donde se promueva la libre determinación, el consentimiento libre, previo e informado. En UICN, el estándar de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza nos habla de la generación económica. Habrá que asegurar que éste esté dirigido a superar la pobreza y extrema pobreza que padecen millones de personas en el mundo, incluyendo a los pueblos indígenas. Nos habla del desarrollo sostenible. De igual manera, tendremos que asegurar que éste se centre en el bien común y que cambie el modelo basado en la acumulación de capital. Es momento de ver de forma equilibrada lo monetario y lo no monetario. Las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza se deben promover única y exclusivamente para desarrollar un proceso sostenible de uso, manejo y conservación de la naturaleza, ya que, como todo instrumento, existe el riesgo de que pueda ser usado como un arma para explotar de manera desmedida nuestros recursos y violentar nuestros derechos. El estándar de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza de la UICN debe ser implementada de manera incluyente, donde los pueblos indígenas y especialmente nosotros, las organizaciones indígenas, miembros de la UICN, seamos parte de la estructura de gobernanza, de la toma de decisiones y en la implementación del mismo. Las organizaciones de pueblos indígenas, miembros de la UICN, nos sumamos a monitorear y promover el cumplimiento de este estándar, en su justa dimensión y en consonancia al marco jurídico nacional e internacional. También nos sumamos a mejorar y fortalecer el proceso ya iniciado por UICN para asegurar que los pueblos indígenas seamos reconocidos y respetados como socios igualitarios y claves en la toma de decisiones relacionados a las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y a su implementación de manera justa, equitativa e incluyente. Cierro diciendo que para los pueblos indígenas el estándar de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza tiene que apoyar y aprender a convivir con esos pájaros que nos cantan, con las hormigas que nos dan las señales de alerta temprana, con esos árboles que nos dan aire, con esos océanos llenos de vida, porque esos también nos aportan soluciones para nuestra existencia como pueblos indígenas y humanidad. Matías Chivé, gracias.
Thank you very much, Ramiro, for your intervention, and thank you, Veronica, for your assistance the translation for the audience today. Ramiro, you provided us with some important guidance on ensuring that nature-based solutions reflects the contributions, knowledge, and rights of Indigenous peoples. And also, I particularly like how you highlighted the need for nature-based solutions to help move the global economy to different models that are reflect a more balanced relationship between people and nature. I particularly like to take note of and recognize your point that as IUCN moves forward in implementing the IUCN NBS standards and other actors, that this needs to be done in a manner, and particularly in a way that ensures that IUCN's Indigenous Peoples Organization members are an integral part of the decision-making, the implementation and monitoring and use of the NBS standard. So thank you for highlighting those and other important points. I'd like now to give the floor to Catalina Aguilar, who is going to share with us her thoughts on the topic of empowering people with disabilities through nature. Over to you, Catalina.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and muchas gracias a Ramiro. Thank you very much, Ramiro, for your presentation. I will speak in English because I didn't know I have the opportunity to speak in Spanish, but I know it takes more time, so I will be will try to be brief and trying to address this important topic. First of all, I want to thank you for bringing this discussion in general, to bring in the importance of incorporating a human rights-based approach to natural-based solutions. I think that rethinking how we can make sure that everything we do takes into consideration a human rights based approach is fundamental. And second, for giving me the opportunity to discuss about the impact for persons with disabilities, because very often the minority of people with disabilities and all its diversity is the one that is left behind in the equation. So how do we make sure that the intersections, the interdependence, the links between human rights and the environment and natural-based solutions are inclusive of persons with disabilities is a good question. And I think one that, as you said, we have now an icon with the recognition, the universal recognition of the right to a healthy environment by the Human Rights Council. So how can we make sure that every single person, including those with disabilities and with different types of disabilities, can exercise this right, can benefit from living in a clean and a healthy and a sustainable environment, to be healthy, to foster their well-being, to be secure. It's very interesting because despite the enormous impact that biodiversity loss and climate change has on persons with disabilities, it is very rare that persons with disabilities are actually included in the decision-making to build the solutions. So we have many efforts that are, taking place that are normally not accessible to persons with disabilities, that are not inclusive of persons with disabilities' views and needs, that are not taking into account the support networks or the support measures that persons with disabilities might need to strive. And by doing that, of course, we are jeopardizing a sustainable and better result for everybody, right? I mean, including the diverse views of everybody. I think I couldn't agree more with Ramiro when he's talking about, of course, as indigenous peoples, as children, as women, it's persons with different gender identity and orientation. So all the voices, all the opinions, the perspectives of everybody needs to be on board in order to create innovation, to create better outcomes, better governance, and of course, to make sure that we are indeed advancing in a sustainable path. So I was saying that persons with disabilities are the ones that are more exposed to, for instance, power cuts, heat waves, floods. We are facing the harsher impact, the internally displaced people and how it impacts persons with disabilities. And we are more and more aware, and actually the pandemic has brought this as a big reminder of what is the reality, that we live in a world that is more and more disconnected from nature, right? And the lockdown has reminded us of how important it is to get back to nature, to interact with nature, how it is important for our health, but also for our mental health, how slowing our paths, our rhythm is actually resulting in some good things, how we are recovering the sense of belonging to nature, how we started to plant things in our gardens if we were lucky to have one, or even in our apartments to get little plants and to plant tomatoes, or to be reconnected with life somehow in the middle of the pandemic. But so how do we make sure that persons with disabilities can thrive and can be included in natural-based solutions? I have, and there are 4 points that I want to bring to your attention. 1 is accessibility, 2 is non-discrimination, 3rd is participation, and 4th is support. We are not going to make sustainable change or transformative change unless natural-based solutions are accessible to all people with disabilities. universally accessible. That means not only thinking about physical accessibility, but thinking about access to information, to communication for people that cannot communicate, from sign language to easy to read materials, making sure that there is an effort to make sure that, for instance, national reserves are able, that people with disabilities is able to navigate national parks, that it's able to participate in community projects that are fostering natural-based solutions. Second one is to stop discrimination. We cannot continue to move forward if we continue to discriminate persons with disabilities. And this is by eliminating all the barriers, not only by making things accessible, but many times there are attitudinal barriers, many times there are direct acts of discrimination against persons with disabilities, limiting their possibilities to be agents of change, right? Because we consider that the lived experience of persons with disabilities or their opinions are not as valuable, then we discriminate and we actually neglect them, that agency. And that is very linked to the participation. And you have said that, Jenny, and of course Ramiro said that it's basic for human rights-based approaches. We need people to talk. We need people to sit at the decision-making table. And for that, we need to accommodate. We need to make sure that we broaden the circle so that everybody can get in, including those that are left behind traditionally as persons with disabilities. And that means putting in place strategies of outreach, because many times people is not even aware that they are decision-making tables. So we need to proactively engage and try to outreach people with disabilities, and also create the conditions so that they can participate in a safe and in a meaningful manner. It's not only to bring one person with disability to the table, but actually creating an environment that is conducive to their participation. And the last one is and with that I will end, is support. For long, societies have created networks of support for people to strive. And when we are talking about nature-based solutions, going back to communities, going back to the basic connections that we have with the environment, with our world, with the biodiversity, we also need to make sure that we enable people with disabilities to be part of these new sustainable solutions. And to do that, we need to take into account that many people with disabilities will, despite of if you have an accessible facility or project, if you are trying not to discriminate, and if you're allowing the participation, even just to function in a new environment, persons with disabilities might need specific forms of support. And that needs to be part of the network. That needs to be part of the net that we are building together in these nature-based solutions. Without that, without taking into consideration that specific need of people with disabilities, we won't be able to succeed, and making sure that everybody is in part of the solution, right? I think that the views, the diversity, and the perspective of persons with disabilities will enrich the discussion. And so I thank you for giving us this space to highlight that. And hopefully this is just one step toward in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catalina, for your remarks calling our attention to the situation of persons with disabilities, both their particular vulnerabilities to certain types of environmental impact. So the importance of including them as agents of change in decision-making and action on environment and nature-based solutions. I think the framework that you provided, focusing on the elements of being accessible, barriers and discrimination, and then support will be very helpful in advancing efforts to be more inclusive of persons with disabilities going forward. I would like next to give the floor to Mirna Fernandez, going to, oh, I'm just getting a request actually to see if she might be able to go later. So Mrinalini, if it's okay with you, I will ask you to give the next intervention, speaking on the topic of women in nature and this. So Mrinalini, thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you. And for also the organizers for inviting me for this webinar to share. It's a very important webinar. So my name is Mrinalini, and I'll be talking about women and the links with nature from a gender justice perspective. So women matter, and I think this has been also been portrayed by all my other colleagues who have taken the floor before me, the importance of why different sectors of society matter, and everybody has a role to play, and everybody's contributions have to be recognized. I just took this expert from the IUCN's own publication on gender-based violence and environmental linkages. And gender-based inequalities are pervasive across the world, acting as barriers to equitable and sustainable access, use, control, and benefits related to land and natural resources. Women, for example, represent the majority of the world's poor, landless, illiterate, and informal, as well as unpaid workforces. Even while bearing numerous and key responsibilities for managing natural resources, women are underrepresented in decision-making, especially environmental decision-making, with further inequality in inequitable legal rights and significantly restricted access to resources. So this is why women matter. We are talking about a human rights-based approach in biodiversity governance, in climate spaces, but I think we really need to step this up of how do we really make sure the tools are there, but I think there's always this lack of implementation. Like, where are we really going wrong to really ensure that there are policies and actions in place that will actually address the systemic barriers that women actually face in achieving their full potential, in being the agents of change that we know they are, we know we are. So that is a context of the status of women in a very small nutshell. Now, with the links with the nature-based solutions and women, again, reflecting on what colleague Romero talked about and Jenny talked about, the roles that women play of Indigenous peoples and local communities, rural women, they all play a very important role, including the way they make their contributions to their livelihoods, to their culture, to their identity, and to also their well-being. So actions undertaken under the banner of NBS, however, are potentially broad, and there needs to be a greater clarity on what can, and crucially, what cannot be counted as a nature-based solution. And I think this is, again, I'm reflecting, I will not repeat all that, but also like what Romero talked about. When you're talking about Indigenous peoples, communities, and you always talk about women are the seed keepers, their knowledge, they transfer, they are the guardians, they are the healers, and their knowledge also needs to be recognized. And they also have contributed to maintaining their relationship with nature. And for that, what is really required is that we really need to make sure is what principle or safeguards should attach to them. This is also reflecting on the IUCN's own NBS standards and how the standards would also make sure that it's fully gender responsive. It has the accountability mechanism. It also has rights of women and girls into its own standard besides participation. You know, we're talking about sustainable use, we're talking about governance, we're talking about having a say, and that means giving them the spaces in decision-making spaces, including access and benefit sharing. So this is the last slide of the 3-minute thing. So key messages we're talking about is reducing inequality and addressing gender-based violence. This is again very crucial because as we the webinar also began, that we are in the 16 days of campaign, which ends at December 10th on Human Rights Day, and this is the time frame that everybody's talking about, oranging the world, addressing women's rights, addressing gender-based violence, and this also needs to be reflected in the environmental spaces that we work on, and how policies or practices that are being planned do not further exacerbate extra burden on women, including also addressing the gender-based violence associated with such projects, plans, policies. For NBS, offsetting should be off the table. That means when you're talking about nature-based solutions, we need to look at what it gives, what does it provide, but also the essence of that it has of a whole eco-culture in itself. So carbon is, yes, it does that, it mitigates carbon, but nature also has linkages with Indigenous people's identity, livelihood, our food. So that is something that should also be part of, or should play a very big part, instead of only looking at the economic benefits of nature. Of course, this builds into, we need to harness nature and culture. These linkages are really very important. So together with scientific knowledge, we need to recognize traditional knowledge, funding commitments. We need to make sure when we're talking about all these spaces, including the standards, we really need to make sure that this is one of the enabling conditions, and that is trying to support communities, Indigenous women-led programs, projects to ensure that NBS is actually really affecting or is fully inclusive and transformative. Pursuit and promoting right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. This is for the well-being for everybody, and hopefully that this would be something that would be pursued in all the other upcoming biodiversity and climate-related conventions to ensure that well-being of all, including of women, and everybody is taken on board when we're talking about nature-based solutions. I'm going to keep it to that. Sorry for rushing and being within 3 minutes, and I'm happy to take further questions or clarifications. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Mrinalini, for those important comments and interventions. In the interest of time, I'm going to move directly to the next panelists. And since we are running a little after time, request the two remaining panelists, please, to keep the comments to 3 minutes. Kristen Walker, may I ask you to go next? Over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jenny. And I'd like to thank the organizers for the session today and the speakers that have come before me. I think, what we've heard today is really the importance of inclusion and how we need to think about the systems by which we work and how we need to reimagine the way we do things. And one area that's in particular is, in order to operationalize these things, we need to understand where the resources are flowing from. In Glasgow, we talked a lot about nature-based solutions, the importance and the role of Indigenous peoples and local communities in this context. And we also heard about a lot of government commitments and philanthropy commitments related to Indigenous peoples and local communities. We've heard there's $1.7 billion in commitments, and prior to that, there was the Protect the Planet Challenge for $5 billion as well. And I think the big question we have now is the how. How do these resources get to the communities, allow greater access for women? And I think the important conversation we need to have in really looking at nature-based solutions and people is, how do we transform the systems by which we are working? There are many challenges and barriers to accessing these resources. And some of the conversations that we need to have about accessing those resources aren't always the most exciting ones. How do you change some of the systems and categorization related to risk when it comes to giving government money to communities? And how do we begin to have those dialogues so that communities are actually able to do the work that they want to carry out, that they prioritized, and that they're carrying out for the rest of us. So part of the work that we need to really do is we need to listen more effectively on all of these issues, from Indigenous peoples, local communities, and women. We need to be able to dialogue and discuss from various perspectives. And then we need to come together collectively to imagine how we need to move this forward in the future. And what is the world we want? How do we want to look at nature-based solutions? And really, how do we want to protect the planet? And then how do we collectively come together to act? And we need all of these pieces. We need to make sure that the human rights are enabled. We need to make sure that the enabling environments are there. And then we really need to work hand in hand with communities, with peoples, organizations, and funders to make sure these resources get to the ground. We cannot have another study that is released that indicates only less than 1% of climate funding over 10 years goes to Indigenous peoples and local communities. So I challenge everyone here in this dialogue and discussion to really think about how we need to reimagine conservation and climate change, and how we can move forward collectively, and who are we missing from the table to be more inclusive. So Jenny, I have followed your instructions. I've put a little call out there, so I will pass it on to the next speaker. All right.
Wonderful, Kristen. Thank you for those reminders to focus on dialogue, inclusive dialogue, and change the systems in which we're working. I would like to, thank all of the panelists very much for your interventions and for the important guidance and recommendations that you've given us as part of this dialogue. We are in a few minutes going to move to the open discussion, but before that, we have a brief video, and I'd like to turn to my colleague Veronica to show the video. Thank you.
Tenemos que cuidarla porque
nosotros convivimos con la naturaleza, eso es nuestra casa, ahí hemos nacido, hemos crecido y tenemos una convivencia muy cercana a la naturaleza. Es muy importante cuidar porque gracias a la naturaleza tenemos aire puro, aire sin contaminación, sobre todo, ¿no? Vivir en tranquilidad, en convivencia con todo lo que existe en el bosque.
El territorio para mí es todo, ¿no? Para nosotros como pueblos indígenas es nuestro mercado, nuestra botica, porque de ahí sacamos todo y de eso vivimos. Y también contribuimos con la planeta entera, ¿no? Con el tema de reducción del cambio climático.
I sit by the ocean, my house is by the sea, and just looking out at the ocean gives me peace every day, and that's my relationship with the sea, with the soil, the earth, and with plants.
Nos da todo lo que necesitamos para vivir. Son nuestros mares y océanos y nuestra naturaleza.
Bara bahaba mita yang nanlala ni kumpas kaya wasna, bara bahaba wal lagun kiba, kabo kiba, main kay yang nani daukan kikat, nat kikat, almukinani, dia ismalkan bawal.
Ella anmala mubili, ibdurgan mubili ki buimala di sabugar gebet, nimigan, joecha nikit ki bisaer gebet. Aja margudi, aja margalule, sa purva margi namogan. Itu margo benatkan.
If we want nature to return to, want the earth to return to its maximum stage, plant something every day. Plant something every day wherever you are. To me, that is the nature-based solution that the earth needs.
Para disminuir presiones y amenazas dentro del bosque, del territorio de los pueblos indígenas.
Como también, ¿no? Es que la conservación del bosque sea una alternativa de vida para la población indígena y para la salud del planeta y de todo el mundo, ¿no? Que es lo que se quiere.
Nos quedamos sin agua, sin oxígeno, sin animales y sin plantas.
Es el único lugar para vivir y para que nos dure muchos años.
Se développer en accord avec la nature, c'est laisser un héritage durable à nos enfants, à nos générations futures.
Si la cuidamos, todos seremos felices, porque en ella tenemos vida, alimentos, abrigo y muchas personas a las que queremos.
Para mí, ser veedor es conectar la sabiduría indígena con el conocimiento de la ciencia, como también es velar por los bosques que siempre sean bosques.
Mujeres indígenas, reafirmamos y reconocemos nuestros compromisos y aportes que por miles de años hemos venido realizando en la conservación de nuestra madre naturaleza, en el uso y manejo adecuado de nuestros bosques y la conservación de la biodiversidad. Acciones que venimos implementando en nuestro diario vivir en nuestras comunidades y que estos son transmitibles a nuestros hijos y nietos porque consideramos la sostenibilidad de estas prácticas y conocimientos para el desarrollo de nuestros territorios.
Como dirigente siempre hemos hablado la seguridad territorial, garantizar que nuestro territorio sea respetado.
Es por ello que hacemos un llamado a los tomadores de decisión, los gobiernos, las cooperaciones y otras entidades que en el momento de poder implementar acciones en nuestros territorios reconozcan estos derechos de las mujeres y de los pueblos indígenas como soluciones basadas en la naturaleza.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of the nature champions who appeared in the video and took time to record those videos and share with us their thoughts as well as those windows into their places and cultures for our discussion today. I understand that our last panelist, Mirna Fernandez, is reconnected. I'd like to turn briefly to you for your no more than 3-minute intervention, and then we're going to have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions, answers, and closing remarks. So Mirna, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for connection issues. I will try to keep my presentation short. I want to present the Global Youth in a statement that we developed on nature-based solution. This is a joint initiative between YONGO, the Youth Constituency for the Climate Convention, GVA, which I represent, which is the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and Youth for Nature, that is a global youth organization that works also on nature, climate, and biodiversity. Can we go to the first slide, please? First of all, we noticed that the nature-based solutions is gaining momentum and has been a key pillar of major events as the Climate Action Summit, the Climate Adaptation Summit, and recently the UNFCCC COP26 has talked a lot about nature-based solutions. It is also being featured in the discussions of the new post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and it is appearing in important documents such as the Kunming declaration that came up from discussions. And we see that there are different opinions in the climate and the biodiversity communities. So we see that there are some communities that see nature-based solutions as an opportunity to address the interlinked crisis that we have for biodiversity and climate change. But we also have seen a lot of opinions in nature-based solutions and the language around nature-based solutions as a threat. Because there are critical concerns around it that has not been addressed, and especially with actions, but in general, also something that we noticed is that there is missing a youth united voice across the climate and biodiversity communities. So all these discussions have been happening without a clear and loud voice of young people to address this issue. The next one. So our global youth position statement on nature-based solution is the result of a process that was on a previous slide. I don't know why it is here, but if not, I will just explain the process. We have had a process that first we developed an information brief for our communities showing different perspectives around nature-based solutions. We also developed a survey that we shared with our communities, and we have more than 1,000 responses to this survey. And based on the results of this survey, we developed this global youth statement position, nature-based solutions, which we shared already in the UNFCCC COP26. And we are happy to share it now as well. The results of this statement is on the website that is on this slide, in nbsyouthposition.org. So some of the key points from this global youth position statement on nature-based solutions is that first, nature-based solutions is a new term for an old idea that has been understood and practiced, especially by indigenous peoples and local communities for millennia, but this must not delay the urgently needed decarbonization of our economy, because this is critical and important and urgent. Also, for them to be effective, they must prioritize local biodiversity conservation, ecosystem integrity, that is a key priority, and it has been the #1 concern for young people, the ecosystem integrity that should be safeguarded in the implementation of NBS and ecosystem functions, and it must be grounded in justice, equity, and inclusion. Young people also think that implementation must follow strict binding social and environmental safeguards. Again, the focus should be on ecosystem integrity and functions, but also on the meaningful participation and the free, prior, and informed consent from indigenous peoples and local communities, human and indigenous rights, and also the rights of nature. We also think that the term nature-based solutions, due to its implementation at some levels, has been vulnerable to greenwashing, and it could promote monoculture plantations, the commodification of nature, land grabbing, and other impacts to human rights. And we must address this with, again, these strict and binding social and natural safeguards. And we have also to address the risk that it could overemphasize the carbon sequestration through carbon offsetting. That is not the main goal of nature-based solutions in our view. We think that it's going to be featured in policy, especially the Global Biodiversity Convention and Global Climate Convention, that are multilateral agreements. We need more than principles or standards that are only voluntary. We need binding standards that ensure that the implementation doesn't fall into these risks that young people have identified. As a final message, we say that young people will not tolerate polluters and decision-making to co-opt and misuse the term nature-based solutions to evade the responsibilities. We commit to all the false solutions, but also we commit to the implementation, to the correct implementation of nature-based solutions on the ground, and to be side to side with all the stakeholders, indigenous peoples and local communities, women and children, to promote the nature-based solutions.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you for persisting through your technical difficulties to give us this important message. And I'd like to remind everyone in the audience that all the slides, as well as the video from this dialogue, will be posted online. And so you can go back and take your own time to look in more detail at the points that have been presented. In the remaining part of our agenda, I'm going to ask one question that has come through the chat for Ramiro Batzin, and then ask if any of the panelists would like to give very brief kind of closing remarks or wrap up. Also going to reserve about 5 or 8 minutes at the end of the session for my colleague Veronica Ruiz to give some key points about this dialogue series in general over the course of this year, since this is our last event in the series. So first, the question to Ramiro: what are the enabling conditions that must be in place to ensure that the rights of Indigenous peoples are safeguarded in the implementation of NBS? And again, Ramiro will speak in Spanish and with translation after his remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Ramiro.
Gracias, Jenny. Es importante reconocer que el 80% de la biodiversidad se encuentra en territorios indígenas, que ocupan el 22% de la superficie del planeta. Por consiguiente, su papel reviste particular importancia tanto para la gestión sostenible de los recursos como en la conservación del medio ambiente y la biodiversidad. Es urgente reconocer y resaltar que las mujeres indígenas tienen un rol clave dentro de sus pueblos. Es lo que se refiere a la transmisión intergeneracional de sus tradiciones espirituales, la historia de sus pueblos, su filosofía y en la defensa de la tierra y el territorio y los recursos naturales. Se debe respetar los derechos territoriales a la libre determinación, al consentimiento libre previo informado y a los conocimientos tradicionales. Debe ser un proceso incluyente que ponga a los pueblos indígenas en el centro, que tenga salvaguardas específicas sobre los derechos indígenas, especialmente lo relacionado a la Declaración de Pueblos Indígenas. Que los pueblos indígenas estén en la estructura de gobernanza y no solo de diálogo, o sea, tomadores de decisión, que se reconozca el conocimiento indígena, sus aportes y su forma de vida que ya tienen y que forman parte de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Como mensaje final, quiero decir que las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza deben reconocer, respetar y promover los aportes, sistemas y derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Debemos de vivir en armonía con la madre naturaleza y universo. Solo de esta manera dejaremos a las futuras generaciones un legado como el que recibimos de nuestros abuelos. Gracias.
Wonderful. And thank you, Ramiro, for that response to the question and those closing remarks, which remind us that that ensuring the roles and contributions of Indigenous peoples requires systemic change that addresses many aspects of respect for territorial rights, knowledge, governance, institutions, and the like. In the next 5 minutes, I would like to ask each of the other panelists if you have perhaps 1 minute of key takeaway messages that you would like to leave with the audience. Catalina, do you have a takeaway message you'd like to share? Is Catalina still with us? If not, I will move to Mrinalini. Mrinalini, do you have a closing message you'd like to share?
Thank you. I think one closing message for me would be that if NBS is to kind of go forward, especially in the context of the CBD's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, I do hope that there is a much stronger safeguard and also reference to the roles and contributions of women in the IUCN standard itself, and also then reflecting it for a human rights-based approach into the whole structure to make it a bit more enabling and inclusive and transformative.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's a very important point for us to take forward. Kristen, would you like to offer a takeaway message?
Sure. I think it's important to ensure that Indigenous leadership is at all scales of looking at NBS solutions, that we are hearing the voice and the design and updates and transformation of the standards over time, that it is an inclusive process, and that process and principles and structure also is accompanied by the appropriate funding to support Indigenous peoples and local communities and women and youth in these processes, so that they can actually execute and highlight the specific role that they have in this work. So they would be my takeaway comments.
Thank you, Kristen. An important point. We're seeing a lot more in terms of kind of recognition of the need for increased funding and direct support to Indigenous peoples and local communities for these nature conservation efforts, and now need to follow that through to see how that actually is delivered on the ground. Mirna, may I ask you to give your closing remarks? Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, our generation, the youth generation, has seen, unfortunately, the promises of the Kyoto Protocol, the MDGs, the Aichi targets failing. So that is why now nature-based solutions is going to be featured and adopted in the policy, especially the CBD and the UNC. We really ask for strict social and environmental safeguards that will put ecosystems integrity at first, human rights and nature rights. That is
wonderful. Thank you, Mirna, for those closing comments and takeaway messages. So in the remaining few minutes of our session, well, first I would like to, very heartily thank all of our panelists and speakers for your, very thoughtful contributions to the dialogue today. As I noted at the outset, we really need to be learning more and more from one another and finding ways to kind of join hands and work together on collective efforts. And I think that this dialogue has been a good start in building that kind of collaboration that we need to continue to enhance going forward. Indeed, dialogue and collaboration have been the overall aims of this series over the course of this year, co-hosted by the Geneva Environment Network and IUCN on nature-based solutions. To close, I would like to turn the floor over to my colleague, Veronica Ruiz, to give some reflections on this year-long journey. Over to you, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for giving me the floor. And I think it's well, now it's a little bit difficult to give the closing remark after such a wonderful panel. I have to say I'm delighted to have been hearing from you, but not only from you, but for all the panelists that have been joining us in this 1 year journey. So as I'm saying, this is just the end of 11 events that we have the chance to set up, 11 dialogues, different dialogues for different societal challenges. And we have almost more than 1,000 attendees, people coming from the Geneva international community, but also from all over the world, even in the middle of the night or early in the morning. So thank you so much for the attendees that were also part of this journey. For 11 dialogues, and in total 83 speakers and moderators for so many different sectors. We started talking about health while we will see suffering the most negative impact of COVID, that today we are finishing and closing this journey with human rights in celebration to the Human Rights Days in next 10 of December. So the idea was also to talk about nature-based solutions in a more technical way. Nature-based solutions is everywhere, but what do we mean about nature-based solutions and how we make sure that by working on this area, we are bringing all these different sectors together, different people, different knowledge to achieve also different international goals. The national goals and also how we can contribute towards some of the most important negotiations, conference, and international events that are happening every single year. Like, for example, the Climate Change Conference of Parties, the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and others. So as I mentioned, we started with health. And nature-based solution is a solution to the challenge of meeting our needs without further jeopardizing biodiversity and the health of our planet. Humanity destruction of nature is driving up numerous risks to our well-being and health. Over 7 million people die annually from polluted air and over 500,000 from contaminated water. Over the series of dialogues, it has been highlighted several times that we need to advocate transdisciplinary research to help address complex societal challenges and to integrate knowledge from different scientific and non-scientific stakeholders communities. This is critical to simultaneously reduce the loss of and degradation of biodiversity and to enhance human well-being. It is also important to balance the necessity of what we do between now and 2030 to live in harmony with nature by 2050. So the next decade is our last chance to transform our relationship with nature. We have been already facing the consequences of our broken relation with nature for more than 1 year now due to COVID. The economic consequences of the pandemic have been severe and are foreseen to last over the next several years. Ensuring that the economic recovery is sustainable, green, and replicable as much as possible has been recognized globally. Moving towards more nature-based solutions need to also be about ensuring sustainable, human-centered, and inclusive decent jobs. Conserving biodiversity will not only create jobs, but it will also be less costly than non-action. Many economic activities and jobs are directly dependent on nature and the consistent services they provide. To ensure nature health and address challenges in a holistic and collaborative way, it is critical to bring together actors from the conservation sector and beyond to see where we can make a move and moving to a just and equitable future for all, but especially for the future generations. It is important to encourage global partnerships and solidarity towards the achievement of multiple goals. But most important is to achieve this is to rely on scientific and non-scientific knowledge, indigenous, local, traditional knowledge, systems, and practices. And to the end, the growing momentum for nature-based solutions is a critical opportunity for reframing the wrong understanding of people-nature relation and emphasizing how people are part of nature. By improving our relationship with nature, we could jointly walk towards a common goal, a just, equal future that responds to the challenge of the climate emergency and biodiversity loss. Nature-based solutions offer an inclusive and holistic framing based on solid environmental and social safeguard to uphold human rights and enable a transition to a common goal. And this has been our journey. It has been a wonderful journey where I have the chance to share incredible moments from different experts. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Diana, that also she has been behind all this journey, but also not only her, but a whole team that has been made this possible.
Thank you, Veronica. I won't add more, just to thank all the people who have been behind the scenes to make this journey possible. And you have here on the screen the pictures of the colleagues who have been engaging, you, Veronica, but also you colleagues at IUCN, Daisy, Linda, Michael, Anita, and Dora. And at the Gen, Alice, Malou, and Harvey. I want particularly to thank, we were very happy to engage with IUCN and with their large community. We really met a lot of people and have taken note of the good lessons concerning inclusivity in this process. And as you saw today, despite the fact that for over 18 months now, most of us have been operating almost only virtually. Even in this session where we were talking about people, we still didn't learn that sometimes projecting long videos on this type of events, we lose some of the audience. So thank you all for being here. We will, all the outcomes of these sessions are available on the website. And we will also prepare something on the main outcomes of these 11 sessions. Thank you very much, Jeannie, for your excellent moderation. And I have to, as Veronica mentioned, we were all very happy to end this series of dialogues with this session dedicated to people and to the topics that have been addressed by the various speakers.